It's fine, I'm back. Okay, there it is. All right, so let's go through this madness. So in the Army, someone who has a higher rank than you is your superior. In football, when they pitch the ball out to the side, they call that a lateral. To the side, okay? Someone who falls back lands on their
posterior.
If I have low self-esteem, you might say I have a
Inferiority complex.
A person who brings two opposing groups to an agreement somewhere in the middle is called a
Mediator.
Groovy. The brilliant outside of the sun that we see during an eclipse is the corona. Okay, so the coronal view. Okay, a very blank person.
Shrewd. Sagacious.
Yes. Yeah. Because I was trying to get it sagittal, you know, because someone who really sees things very clearly.
Are you Sagittarius?
And the
Yeah, no, Capricorn. Oh.
I'm Sagittarius. And December the 10th, just tell us. Yeah, so sage or sagacious person, one who sees things very clearly, blah, blah, blah. If highways were named like some muscles, I'll add the word there, then I-10 east from San Antonio to Houston would be called, think like the sternocleidomastoid. That's, so, I was being, okay, well, okay, that's fine, okay, so, I mean, it would be the San Antonio-Houston highway, you know?
It really was that easy?
It was that easy.
All right.
You were overthinking it. Okay, so, someone who is a higher rank, so this is getting at that anatomical term, you know, like the superior vena cava is it's the upper big vein that goes into your right ventricle, okay? Right atrium, excuse me. Returning blood to your heart from the upper part of your body, okay? So superior, we'll see that often in stuff. Things to the side, we have a muscle in the larynx, the lateral cricoarytenoid, and it's obviously to the sides. And then the name, lateral, so to the side, crico, that's where it starts, arytenoid, that's where it inserts. Bless you.
Thank you.
So the name really tells you where it is, and also, as we'll talk about today, what it does, you know, how it's going to contract and how things are going to move. Someone falls back, you know, so a back view is a posterior, you know, from the back side. So the low inferior, right, like the inferior in vena cava. That's the one that just comes to my mind. You know, bringing things together towards the midline, a mediator. Okay, so medial. There's a term we will talk about this semester, medial compression, which is where your vocal folds, the vocal processes of the vocal folds are brought together. Okay, because that lateral cricoarytenoid muscle that I was just talking about pivots your cartilages and brings your vocal folds together. Okay, so good terms to know, because then when you see it in a book, and instead of it just being a bunch of gobbledygook, the name actually helps you understand where it is and what it does. Most of the muscles with our larynx and stuff are really good in that respect. And then the coronal, so like a coronal view, okay, is kind of a slice like that. The sagittal view, my wife has borrowed it for the day, but we have some anatomical models that I'll bring to class. And it's basically if you cut somebody so that there's a symmetrical side on either half, right down the middle, that's the sagittal view. Okay. Ta-da. Well, I compiled all your questions. There are 3 pages of them typed. And then I put them in categories, kind of when we're going to be going over stuff related to that. So let me send those around. Yeah, this is something I started doing a year or so ago, and it seemed like a real good way to kind of help organize, you know, because material to find answers for, it just makes it a little more, makes it real. All right, and I've got a lovely thing on Blackboard that we are going to look at. I have several things on Blackboard we're going to look at. One thing is a short little video, which kind of gets into my philosophy of why do we study all this stuff? Why do we need to know all this anatomical stuff? So I have a video here that I think says it all.
Stop, the car shakes. Now, a couple of days ago, I was coming down this. What's your hand here? Brakes. Rotors. Calipers. It's the calipers, it's okay. Oh, calipers! Don't you want to take out some tools or something? That's not how we do things here. Don't worry about it. Alright.
Now, we all get a good laugh out of that, but the field of voice teaching was not terribly far removed from that, and still, there are, in some corners, that is sort of, some of the crazy stuff that goes on. My wife had a lesson with a teacher, actually a highly regarded one, which I will not name for obvious reasons. And the entire lesson, this was at the NATS intern program, the entire lesson, so Kathy would sing, and she would say, is it ah, or is it ah? And Kathy would sing again. She'd go, So, do you think that should be ah or ah? I mean, literally for an hour.
Oh gosh.
Now, you could read into that, okay, is she talking registration? Is she talking, expressive things and so on? But it got old, It got old really, really quickly. And that's not the view I want. I want from the beginning. So what is pedagogy? As the notebooks come out. What is it? How to teach. Well, it is definitely a class you gotta take, right? To graduate. Yeah, get out of this building, right? Okay. It's a force of the Lord. It sounds really cool. I love pedagogies too. It has something to do with teaching. Ding, 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 ding. All right. So here's the definition. The art, practice, or profession of teaching, especially systematized learning or instruction concerning principles and methods of teaching. Richard Miller wrote a book. It's called The Structure of Singing, and it's very systematic. And I have to say, Scott McCoy's book is lined out in a very systematic fashion, and my teacher's book and my teacher's teaching was very systematic. There are some fundamental principles, and we have to kind of present things and how we structure our teaching with people, kind of following some of that. PowerPoint's up there, so if you don't grab it as we're going through things, fret not, it's there. So we've got two sides, of things that we're dealing with, because we're dealing with music, it's not just athletic, like we're going in there and just, how high can I sing, how loud can I sing? Although sometimes that's, you get to the end of some big ensemble of an opera, and it's pretty much, how loud and high can everybody sing? But there's an aesthetic thing, and yet, and so us as teachers, we have to understand that aspect of it, but we also have to understand that these are people's bodies making these sounds. So we have to understand that part of it as well. We have to understand, what can we ask them to do that's going to be safe? How can we structure our teaching in a way that's going to be appropriate for where they are age-wise? way you teach a 16-year-old high school student is very different from the 70-year-old man in your church choir. They're in very different places physically. Okay? So there's my deep thought there. You know, because why sing? Well, we have something to express. Somebody wrote some poetry that was really cool, and that inspired another person, or maybe the same person, to write some music which moves us and takes us, you know, to a better place, or a sadder, darker place, you know, it just depends. So we've got that side that's our why, and this is our how. Okay, so in the US, we had a number of people back in the 1940s and 50s and 60s who really kind of turned the profession in a different direction. So we had Burton Coffin, who was at the University of Colorado. The famous vowel chart, the Coffin vowel chart. He was very interested in acoustics, and he was my teacher's teacher. I never met Coffin. He had passed away before I got out to Colorado, but he had a tremendous influence on Barbara Dosher, and indeed on the profession. And all three of these men were in high leadership positions with Nats as well. They were deeply involved in Nats. William Vennard, who was at USC, and he was Marilyn Horne's teacher, among others. And then Ralph Appelman was at Indiana. So they were all at big state universities, and they all knew each other. And I got to have lunch one time with Richard Miller, and was talking about some of them. He goes, "Oh yeah, Bert and I, we used to get together at Nats conferences, and we'd go have scotch and oysters." It was like fried oysters and scotch. That's what they would do together. Okay, thanks. They were all interested in acoustics and physiology. Coffin was interested in linguistics and phonetics, so was Appelman. Coffin, there's those books of translations and so on that he also did, and IPA and so on. Vennard went over to the Netherlands and he went over to the Netherlands and he did voice research with the guy who was probably the top voice research guy in the world at the time, Jan Willem van den Berg. You're not going to be tested on that, just let you know. But these are important people because they are the ones who kind of turned American pedagogy towards this integrating science with the art kind of approach. In addition to, you know, using your experiences and the sensations we all feel when we sing, incorporating a scientific underpinning to the teaching. So, a couple of caveats that we just have to kind of get out there. A few things we need to have. Got to know your IPA, because when we're talking about vowels and consonants, that's our tool for agreement of this is what this sound is. You know? So when we're talking about vowel modification, well, what vowel are you hearing? Forget what the word is on the page. What is the singer actually doing? You know, we're going to use IPA for that. Every time we talk about pitch, just remember middle C is C4. You may have learned that in music theory classes, but so the high C that a tenor sings is C5, and a soprano's high C is C6, and you know C2. Those of you who were there on Friday when Alejandro sang the Isis Mutusiris, and he sang the low C briefly, kind of touched it, and came back up. I looked over at Dr. Allen, and I was like, yeah, it's fun. We're going to talk, when we talk about how loud things are, we're going to use decibels, and it's a log scale, okay? So if I double the intensity of something, it went up 3 decibels. Okay, so like if we have one singer singing at 90 dB, and we have another singer come up and sing at 90 dB right next to them, okay, the effect we're going to get is 93 dB. We're not going to get 180 dB. That would be enough to kill you. I mean, seriously, 180 dB is close to like the space shuttle taking off. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And we will use hertz for pitch. So 440 is the A that the violin tunes to. Some good ones to start kind of memorizing. Middle C is 261. Okay. So your soprano high C is then 524. Okay. I'm sorry, 1024. 512 is the tenor high C, and then 1024 is the soprano. Yeah. Is that right?
So that's the quietest any soprano can hit?
No, that's the frequency.
Oh, okay.
Frequency.
That's the pitch. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was it? Then decibel is volume.
Middle C is 261.
Yeah, the soprano high C.
Yeah, I screwed it up. It's like 1044.
Okay.
Yeah, I said 1024, so 1040. Okay, moving on. So why are we studying this? Well, remember the video, we don't want to be doing voodoo. It's the calipers. Okay, great, No, we don't want to be doing voodoo, We don't want to be telling someone, okay, sing it out of your third eye, well, if it doesn't come out of their nose or mouth, we don't hear it. There is no third eye out here or whatever, that sound's going to come out of. Let's try a little experiment. Okay, everybody hum. Doesn't that feel great? Okay, all right, take a breath. We're going to hum, and then you're going to pinch your nose closed. No matter how hard you try it again. It's going to stop. Because if it doesn't have an opening to the outside world, i.e. the nares of your nose or your mouth, we're not going to hear it. So much for it comes out of my sinuses, or whatever. You may feel vibration there, and that vibration is great and cool and can help you on stage when the orchestra's playing and you can't even hear yourself. That's great. But the sound isn't coming from there or here or here. It's coming out your mouth. Or if you're doing a nasal vowel, it's coming out your nose and your mouth. Okay, so we need to know those kind of things because lots of our students may have been told wrong things, and we need to be the mythbuster and say, no. Because there's a danger in trying to make things work the way we think they work, and then they use extra effort to try to make it go that way when in fact it doesn't go that way. That's like body mapping, which we're going to be talking about real soon. So if you don't know the technique, you're not going to be able to be as expressive. I mean, Maria Callas was a wonderful expressive artist on stage, but I can't help but listen to her recordings and go, gosh, if she had had a better teacher, think of how expressive she could have been. She was expressive with this kind of wounded instrument that she had, and terribly moving. I mean, and you had to see her on stage. If you've ever watched videos of her, she hardly moved because she never wore contacts on stage. If she moved, it was with great purpose and intent. It was a lot of her acting was with her face and with gestures. Anyway, so we've got to know what we're telling people because, they're putting a part of their body in trust with us. Would you go to a gym and work with a fitness instructor on, like doing weightlifting or stuff that didn't understand some things about your joints, to say, okay, no, you shouldn't lift the bar that way, you're going to get injured. If you lift the bar that way, you're going to hurt your back if you lift that way. They've studied that stuff. Would you go to a doctor who was really good on, okay, this is is the way it needs to feel when you move your leg, to have them operate on your knee. No, you want somebody who knows where all the cartilages are, so that when they cut you, they know they're going to do it right. Yeah. So the same thing, as a singing teacher, you need to be that person that your students feel like, I can trust this part of my body that I'll never get back again. You know, I mean, we can do miraculous things with surgeries and things like that, but why get damaged in the first place? So, we don't want to be doing malpractice. And think about it, you know, if you play the violin, you know, or any of our stringed instruments that have no frets, yeah, you are having to learn kind of where to depress things, but you're not turning the peg at the same time. Trombone is probably the closest analog because, you know, you are literally tuning the thing as you move the slide in and out, as well as you've got a vibrator there, and then you're adjusting, you're kind of tuning the tube. And we do the same thing as singers. We're tuning the tube depending on the pitch and the vowel and stuff that we want to sing. So it's pretty tricky business, this singing. And again, you know, the coach analogy. I was reading I swim and do things like that, and I was reading up about Michael Phelps and his coach, Bob Bowman. And they were training before the Olympics, and I mean, they had little stick things that during workouts, they were checking his lactic acid levels during workouts. I mean, that's how sophisticated the training is. And distance runners who have sensors in their shoes, and then they download the data from the shoe to, you know, figure out how much force they're exerting, you know, what can they do biomechanically with their stride to get a more efficient stride, you know. And amateur athletes nowadays wear heart monitors when they're training for triathlons. You know, they're on their bike, they're wearing a heart rate monitor. Lance Armstrong, when he was cheating in all those races. I mean, incredible athlete, my gosh, you know, an incredible comeback from near death. But, I mean, every one of those Tour de France races, he had a heart rate monitor on. And he had an earplug in. He had his coach on one earplug, and he had his heart rate monitor going there, boop, 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 you know, or telling him, or he had, you know, something on his wrist, monitoring his heart rate. So, okay, I'm climbing this hill, and he could monitor where he was and his effort level. You know, okay, I know my max heart rate is this. I need to gear down, or I need to draft behind somebody. So, I mean, sports is really that sophisticated. We've got similar tools that we can use in training singing at times when we want to. So, skip all those up. So, anatomy is the study of the parts. And then physiology is, how do the parts all work together? These are kind of, if we look at how we have our semester lined out, we've got a lot of structure of things. We'll be doing Alexander stuff and body alignment first. That kind of gives you a chance to start wading through a lot of the reading about respiration. And we'll learn, you know, the lungs and the skeletal structure that's as far as like our spine and our ribs and so on. The anatomy of the larynx, and then the physiology, how all these things work together. And then the next big thing will be acoustics, because that's what we do. We generate sound. And then we chop that sound up into intelligible, I teach voice for a living, intelligible bits. Funny I would trip up on that. Later on in the semester, we'll be talking about voice development, which is very important for those of you in the music ed track, because your choirs, whether it's elementary or middle school or high school kids, where are they developmentally in terms of what's going on in their larynx and in their whole body? What can you expect of them? What's a healthy sound? What's not a healthy sound? well as working with adults. I have taught people uh, I've taught kids as young as 8, and a gentleman who I see every once in a while now who's 84, and he used to be a Vegas singer. He and Bobby Darin were good friends. He would be playing the small outer club, and Bobby had the big hall, and they would be at a casino together. And then after they'd finished their shows, they'd go to another place, and they'd love to ballroom dance. Him and his wife, and Bobby Darin and his wife, and they would go ballroom dancing together. You know, I mean, the man has amazing stories and still sings really quite well. And he's 84. He still goes out on cruise ships every once in a while and works on a cruise ship. But working with someone at that age and what his vocal issues are is very different from working with a child. And then hygiene, how to take care of ourselves. A lot of you had hygiene questions, so we'll get to those. So these are some of those terms that we talked about, and I got them up there, and I thought, rather than just a dry recitation of them, that we should do something here in the room. So, I'm going to give you one of these, and there's a thing of tape up here, and you're going to prowl around the room, and you're going to find something that is appendicular, or, well, those are pretty hard. I might save one or two of those. I'll put those on the bottom of the pile, okay? But you can definitely find something that's posterior. Want to play?
Sure.
Okay, so find something in the room that demonstrates, and then you can tape it there. So I will do one just as an example. Okay, I'll give you that one. Okay, so like, for example, here's one. Appendicular. Okay, well, you could say that this thing is an appendage off of the body of the big screen, right? Okay, or like the leg of, here's the body of the chair, and then that's a leg, that's an appendage, okay? So, go. When you find something, get a piece of tape, tape it to it.
It might be.
Yeah.
That works, right? Sort of the middle. Yeah.
Really don't want to take this in my head.
It's actually you could demonstrate that on the board as a hint.
What do you have? Oh.
I'd rather
Is
take
it
this in
like-
my head, that makes more sense to me.
Take it.
But I don't want to
Is
take
it
this in
tough?
my head.
I don't.
I'm just gonna leave it right there, but if you want to.
I mean, does it?
Wait, Dad.
Okay, let's see. Okay, okay, go coronal, explain.
It looks like the crowd, isn't it? But
Well,
I thought it was
okay,
right in
the
my head.
coronal section, if you remember, like the sun. So a coronal section is if you were to slice me this way. So so the coronal section is kind of that plane.
Okay.
Make sense?
No.
So it'd be like halfway through the room maybe? Or I don't get it.
Well, if for someone were to take a guillotine and go through me this way, so like right along there, that's a coronal section. So you have an anterior and a posterior half.
Okay. Does a coronal section, extend all the way through the torso?
It could, if that's what you were doing, yeah. Okay?
Okay.
But
All right.
it wouldn't be this way because,
That's sagittal.
right, you need like
Yeah.
a front and a.
Yeah, sagittal puts you, basically two, a left and a right, while a coronal gives you a front and a back
Mm-hmm.
section. Okay, transverse,
I couldn't remember if it was side to side or
we'll do it
sideward.
this way. That would be
Mhm.
transverse.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so transverse is basically against the grain, and longitudinal
Yeah.
is with the grain. So if you've got muscle fibers, like on my bicep here, the muscle fibers go that way, so that would be longitudinal. Transverse would be, okay? Every once in a while there'll be a picture, like a vocal fold or something, and it's been sliced in a certain way, and McCoy will use those terms, okay? All right, let's see. That was that. We have a bunch over on the piano here. Superficial. Yeah, so the exterior, right, on the surface, okay, and then we have to believe he wanted to go in there, but the top is locked, okay? So the interior, okay. All right, inferior, so this is like lower, is that what that was supposed to be?
Yeah, is that put in
And
the wrong scene?
towards the middle, okay, on middle C, okay, I get that. Superior is up there on the top, okay, that's good. Posterior, that's the back of the room. Anterior, okay, that's the kind of the front of the cabinet. Okay, good. Am I leaving anyone out? Oh, the door. What's on the door? Exterior, yes. Okay, yes, exterior. Well, I will go around after class and pick them all up so that we can play this game again. But it's a good, oh, they're over there. Excuse me. I can't read my notes without my glasses. Gotta go to the eye doctor. Okay, so lots of what about this?
Oh, you said you had to go to the eye doctor and Caitlin and I.
Oh.
Your mom.
Oh.
She came to you.
She came to you. She came right to
That's
us.
true.
That's right.
That's true. So there's lots of terms. We covered most of these. Origin and insertion are real good ones. Anybody tell me what those are from the reading?
The origin where something begins, like a muscle.
A
for example,
muscle.
begins, and the insertion is where it ends up and what it's attached to.
Yeah. So, and the origin is the more stable part, and the insertion is the thing that's more movable. Okay. So, for instance, we have a muscle, and it's called the sternothyroid muscle. Okay. So it starts down here on my sternum, and it's going to attach to my thyroid cartilage. Now, my sternum is much more stable than my larynx, which can go. Well, I can make it go down. Okay, that's down. And I can make it go up, but yeah. Anyway, swallow and it goes up and down. Okay, so the sternum, and it's named sternothyroid. So the ones that are labeled that way, rather than like they're by their shape or something, and most of the ones in the larynx, thank goodness, are named this way. I'm so glad of that. It sure helps me remember what they do. Okay, so like the sternothyroid, this is the more stable part. This is where it inserts. So what does that muscle do? Well, muscles pull towards their point of origin. At least that's how we kind of, in general, that's the way that we think of it. So that muscle, when it works, lowers my larynx. Of course, I was recruiting some others too, but okay. And then a process, we have everybody go to your ear and then kind of walk back with your fingers, and you can find a kind of a hard bony part there of your skull. Okay, that's your mastoid process. you've got a big old muscle, your sternocleidomastoid, that's one of your head turning muscles, okay? And again, it's named sternocleido is your clavicle, and then mastoid, okay, so it inserts up there. Okay, this is the more stable thing. Your head can move more. Okay, so really cool. It's really important to get real familiar with these because every one of the muscles, they're named this way. You know, they're either named by their shape. McCoy had that whole list. They're named by their shape or something about their function, or, and in the case of the larynx, where they're located, and the name tells you what they do. We've got kinds of connective tissue. So we have bone. Everybody find a bone. Yeah, find a bone somewhere. Yeah. Okay. Which are held together by ligaments and tendons and moved by muscles. Okay. Ligaments bind bone to bone, bone to cartilage, cartilage to cartilage. Tendons are less flexible, less elastic than ligaments. Okay? Name the biggest tendon in your body. Your Achilles tendon is that big, thick, well, I guess you could count the central tendon of the diaphragm as being, but it's very, very thin. When we go to the cadaver lab, it's the most amazing thing. I mean, because you will be able to put your hands, if you're so desirable, put your hands in a dissected person, and on either side of their diaphragm, you can shine a light and it shines right through that central tendon. It's so thin.
Wow.
It's translucent. Anyway, but tendons are muscle to bone, and that tendon, the reason people have problems with the Achilles tendon, number one, because of the load that it bears, number two, because of crazy shoes that people wear, and number three, tendons don't have good blood supply, especially that one. They tend to not have a lot of good blood supply. But fortunately, you know, fortunately, all the stuff in our larynx, those are ligaments. They're not tendons, okay? You've got a ligament right on the edge of your vocal fold. That's a pretty important one. We've got two kinds of cartilage. There's the hard kind of bluish white kind that makes up your larynx. So everybody find your Adam or Eve's apple. If you're having a hard time finding it, you can just tip your head up and swallow, and you'll feel something move around. The other kind of cartilage, that cartilage is called hyaline. The other kind of cartilage, which I don't know the fancy name for, is the stuff like your ear and the tip of your nose, and it's softer, so it must have a higher percentage of elastin fibers in it, I'm guessing. That would be my guess, because it's more flexible. And so your larynx is made up of what? Cartilage and ligaments, and there's some muscles. Yeah. What is the larynx for? Well, first of all, it's there. It's the last line of defense before something would go down and block your airway. Right? Because once you get past the vocal folds, it's trachea and then it's lungs. So your vocal folds, their first and foremost thing to do is to keep you alive. You know, they're the last line of defense. And those adductory muscles can close really, really quickly. Really, really quickly. When people are towards the end of their lives with neurological diseases and things like that, they tend to have a hard time with swallowing and the coordination of swallowing, and that they aspirate food and they get pneumonia. That's often the cause of death in people with, you know, Parkinson's and things like that, ALS and so on. And, you know, they lose the ability to swallow well, and they aspirate food as they're swallowing, and they get infections, lung infections. I mean, that my mom had urinary tract and respiratory infections when she died. That's exactly what was going on because of swallowing. So that airway protection is the prime function of the vocal fold, okay? Secondary, very secondary, is this communication, which has been overlaid on top of that. So never forget, that we basically have a highly evolved valve down there. That's really kind of what it is. It's a highly evolved valve. I have some articles, they're not required, but I have some things on Blackboard. There's an article by Tecumseh Fitch, who is a biologist, and one of his big research areas is how humans have developed so that speech is possible. It isn't possible in the other apes, but in humans we have the ability to speak, and he's been looking at like how the larynx has changed in primates and so on. I mean, he's looked at other animals and stuff. It's really fascinating stuff. So if you're interested in that kind of thing. So I got kind of quickly trying to move through. We've got different muscle types. The slow response, high fatigue resistance. So these are like our postural muscles. Those real deep postural muscles. We also have the people who are endurance athletes. I would imagine Katie Ledecky has a lot of these. She has a good mix of all the muscle types because she's able to swim fast as well as long. So your slow oxidative ones, and then fast glycotic is the FG. They are the ones that like your eyes, like blinking your eyes. Okay, just for an experiment. 30 seconds. I'm going to ask you to blink your eyes. Okay, ready? Go. Blink, 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 blink. Keep blinking. Keep blinking. Keep blinking fast as you can. Like you're watching a bad movie. Keep blinking. Keep blinking. Are they getting tired?
Yeah.
Okay, that was 20 seconds. Stop. Okay, so those muscles are really, really good at, we blink all the time during the day and just don't even notice it, And again, that's a protective thing, to protect your eyes, right? Okay. Those muscles are very good at that really quick response, but they fatigue very quickly. Okay? So think of your Usain Bolt, okay? Guy is amazing at a short sprint, 100 meters, 200 meters. He's actually done 400 meters a couple times, but he doesn't want to. Okay? He's not the guy that you would have run, the 5,000 meters. He'd be looking at you like, are you serious? I haven't run that far in my life. Okay? But he's got tremendous fast twitch fibers in his legs, okay? So your explosive sports, people tend to have lots of these in whatever it's, in tennis, they typically have it in their legs and whichever arm they hit with a lot. A baseball, a really good baseball hitter, baseball is a very explosive oriented sport. So is football, basketball. A lot of the sports that we favor in this country are more explosive oriented sports. Games like soccer has a mix. Distance running, distance swimming, triathlons and things like that. The people who are most successful in those tend to have a lot of the slow twitch fibers. Okay? Then there's one other kind that's the fast oxidative glycotic that has good endurance and yet fast response time as well. And our larynx has a lot of those. So that, because think about it, they need to be vigilant. Your vocal folds, those muscles that control your opening and closing of your larynx, they're doing that all day long while you're breathing, while you're swallowing. They need to be able to do their job quickly and yet do it thousands and thousands of times a day too. Okie dokie. Um, we've got types of muscle as well. So there's fiber types, which is what we were just talking about, and then big groups in terms of talking about muscles. The striated, those are voluntary skeletal muscles. And we say voluntary, but I think McCoy brought that up. You know, I can say breathe in, and I breathe in, but I can't say, okay, I want my diaphragm to go this far. You know, just like he talked about the muscles in our larynx, a lot of them are quite voluntary, but we don't have direct control over them. I can say, do that to my arm, but as far as like, I just thought about changing the pitch, and my muscles did what they needed to do. You know, so they're under indirect voluntary control, I guess is a good way to say that. And then the smooth ones, I am on a diuretic for an ear condition that I have, and it affects, among other things, it affects how much sodium I retain and some other things, but it also has some effects upon some smooth muscles, okay? And there are other, if you know people who are on like lisinopril, which is another blood pressure medication, and like Flomax, which men take if they have enlarged prostates and things like that, and those relax some of those smooth muscles that line, you know, your urethra or your blood vessels and so on, and they're real good for like lowering a person's blood pressure because the muscles are not quite so constricted all the time, okay? So, and you know, your small intestine and so on, smooth muscles, those are involuntary. And then the cardiac muscle, which thankfully for all of us in here, is happily working in the background without us having to think about it at all. Thank goodness. And you know, they can take cardiac muscle and put it in a nutrient bath, and it just sits there and it contracts. It's going to sit there and continue doing its thing, you know. Whether it has a full heart or not, those fibers, that's the way they're made. Cool stuff. Yep, there's that note. This is another good one. We've got, and then I know we need to go. Antagonist muscle pairs. Okay, so with breathing, you know, your diaphragm contracts and descends. Well, your abs have to let go for that to work. Okay, we're going to end class on this slide. So everybody stand up, and then you'll be ready to go after this. Okay, so tense your abs up like you're doing a crunch. Okay, you get a pass.
As best as I can.
Yeah, okay. So tense your abs up, okay, get them really, really firm, like, you know, okay, yeah, boy, there's a cute guy on the beach, right? Okay, cute girl, whatever. Okay, so really tight. Now try to breathe in deep and hold your muscles tight like that. You don't get very far, do you? No. Okay, now let your belly go. Okay, now breathe in. Okay, so your abs have to release for your diaphragm to be able to fully move, right? Okay, so all of these are examples of these agonist-antagonist pairs, like your bicep and your tricep, and they balance each other's action. Inside your larynx, we've got the lateral cricorytenoid and the posterior cricorytenoid, the primary adductor and the primary abductor. Internal and external intercostals between your ribs, the ones that raise your larynx and lower your larynx, okay? And then the muscle that makes up the body of the vocal fold itself can also isometrically contract, that it doesn't really change length, but its tension will change. And that's how we do a crescendo without changing pitch.
Wow.
Yeah. That's how, when we do a crescendo, we increase our breath pressure and we isometrically contract that TA muscle, so your vocal fold gets stiffer and resists the air more, but yet we learn how to keep it the same length. It's pretty cool.
That is cool.
All right,